We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Patrick has some slides here for you to look at before then. And today we're going to be talking about practical refactoring in C#.
Here's some real life scenarios that need refactoring.
Nice.
I'd like to refactor JavaScript altogether. In fact, I guess people already have. Maybe I shouldn't start anew.
Right. So again, we'll be starting in about 1 minute here. So we're just looking at some fun slides in the meantime.
How many of you would rather keep square wheels on your app because you don't have time to refactor it?
Nice.
If you refactor often, you'll have less of this.
Mm-hmm. 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 Again, we'll be starting here in just momentarily here. We're just looking at some fun slides here with Patrick. All right, I think we'll get started here. So thanks everybody for showing up to MDC 2020 virtual edition. Today we're going to do practical refactoring in C# with Patrick Shalopsky. And be sure to use the send a question button in the bottom right of your screen if you have any questions during the presentation, and we will answer those. And let's see, just double checking that we are good to go. Yep, good to go. So Patrick, take it away.
All right, thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, happy to present on refactoring. So hopefully some of those slides jog something in your head for you. I am a architect and software developer for General Mills, and I am really passionate about making code better because I've had to work in so much code that could easily be made better if someone would just take the time to do it. So that's why I'm presenting this topic. Personally, I like drinking tea and watching baseball. I got my my cup of tea here ready to go. The presenter before me in the other session, Eric Honorheim, likes to get hopped up on coffee before every presentation. I go a little calmer than that. If you were here for Keith's presentation right before this, he has a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm using his code today to demo. So thanks if you're watching, Keith. I'll have to get in touch with you soon to let you know what I'm doing to your code. But anyway, what is refactoring? Refactoring makes your code better without changing its behavior. Well, that begs the question, what is behavior, right? It's output or side effects, but it also could mean like performance or resources. How fast is it running? How well does it work for the user? Generally, it shouldn't change during a refactor. If it does change, then it's not, you've done something more than refactoring. Doesn't mean it's bad, but you've changed the behavior, you made it better, and maybe your goal is to make it better, but you've also changed the behavior. Hopefully the behavior changes for the better too. So, but that's the definition of refactoring. It's a change that isn't changing the behavior. And the benefit of it is increased maintainability mainly. I mean, there's other benefits, makes things easier to read. You might find bugs better. You might be able to enhance it better. You might be able to find further opportunities for more or broader refactoring. So all those are great reasons. In general, you're making your code more maintainable. So that leads us to the thought that it's best to refactor the code you're most likely to work with the most often. Probably shouldn't spend a lot of time refactoring code that you plan never to change again. On the other hand, if you've got 100 different pieces of code in your application, 100 different classes, and you're not sure where to start refactoring, start in the place that you think is likely to need the most adjustments going forward. There's where you're going to get the refactoring benefit the most. So I like to teach the only good way to refactor is in a small, easy step and repeat. I'd say it this way, 5 refactors at 99% confidence are better than one big refactor that where you're still pretty confident, but inevitably you'll make an error. Even if you only make an error 1 time out of 5, that's still a lot of time wasted in refactoring. In fact, this is the reason why people are reluctant to refactor, I think, is because they've tried it before and they make mistakes and they regret the time that they had to invest in fixing the mistake and detecting it. So the solution to that is to refactor in smaller and smaller steps. I'm going to try to demonstrate that today. So this session is going to be heavy on code demo. And so I hope that you will, that's what you're looking for here. We're going to jump into the code very shortly here. Reckless refactoring can introduce defects, right? You'll make one of those mistakes. In fact, maybe you're just not careful enough at all and you make a mistake that's not centrally related to your refactoring. Or you refactor something that is 99% good, but there's one little edge case that you miss in your refactoring. That's always possible. So, but I'm going to hold that if you're going to do it wisely, if you're going to do it often, if you're going to do it pervasively, and you're going to do it in smaller and smaller chunks, you're going to prevent more bugs than you cause. And so therefore it's worth doing. You never want to be caught in the, one moment, I gotta, want to make sure I'm sharing all rightly. All right, yep. I'm sharing the wrong thing, aren't I? Sorry, I had a little technical difficulty. Let me get back to sharing.
Sure, no problem. And then when you bring up your code, just make sure that all your code is at a larger font as well for us.
Oh yeah, definitely. All right.
Thank you.
So assuming you can see my screen now, let me know if you can't. So my point here is you need to refactor as you go. And I make this statement: if I'm not willing to refactor when I am changing related code, that is when I'm making an enhancement or a fix. Surely I'm not going to be willing when I'm not changing the code. Often we say, oh, I got to make this fix. I don't have time to refactor. I'd want to get this done. Maybe then later I can come back and refactor my code, make the structure better. And the truth is, you're most familiar with the code when you're making a change, when you're making a fix. You have to understand the code well enough to make your fix. So you need to take that time to refactor it. I'm not saying it has to be in the very same commit, but immediately before or immediately after you change, you make your fix, aim for a refactor. And when I am not sure which way I should go, I'm going to do the refactoring before I make my fix, because it's going to make my fix clearer. It's going to make it more obvious what I've done, what I'm going to do. So the scope can be broad or narrow, right? Start within the most narrow ones if you haven't done a lot of refactoring. Code cleanup and fix up, that is more valuable than you think. Just to get the really no structure changes, get it cleaned up. Otherwise, another step higher, you're going to reorganize and refine, make some new methods, order things better, factor out some common code into other classes. And then the biggest one that is just to re-architect, and that can be harder to bite off. But once you do a bunch of the smaller ones, you're often ready for that bigger one because it makes it clear. So they work together. Don't feel like you're restricted to only the big changes that really matter, because the small ones can lead to big ones, and the small ones might matter more than you think. And so I want to highlight the most important refactoring, the rename refactoring. It's the simplest one. It doesn't hardly change anything, but fix those names. That'll make your code so much more understandable. Get rid of Hungarian notation, get rid of abbreviations, get rid of things that are just misnamed because you thought you were going in one way and then months later it's become something else. do as much as you can to get your names right, and that'll be one of the easiest refactorings and one of the highest value ones. In Visual Studio, that's Control R, and you can do that on a method, on a variable, on almost anything that you provide a name to. All right, I'm gonna jump in the demo next, but please call out or type in that's too fast, or ask a question like, wait, what about that other thing that I missed? Because I'm gonna power through these and go kind of quick. And if you have trouble following along, I wanna make sure I go back over it. I think we'll have enough time for that. So first thing I wanna show is that I'm in ReSharper. I've got ReSharper installed in Visual Studio. I've got Keith's async await pane code up here, so that I'm going to refactor his account controller today as part of my demo. And in ReSharper, you see it gives me this code analysis, and I have 2 warnings. And so I'm going to highlight ReSharper at the beginning here a little bit, knowing that you may not have ReSharper. That's okay. I think you'll get the point. And then I'll quickly move away from ReSharper. We won't dwell on ReSharper too much. But the great thing about ReSharper is it tells you the most important issues, these warnings. And so you can go to any file and just click on this icon, and you see, oh, we've got a ReSharper warning here. Unused directives. Very common to have unused usings in your code. So just remove them. That's a high confidence refactor. You don't have to worry that that's going to get screwed up. That's rock solid. So there, I've just removed a using that I'm not using. I click here and I go to the next one. So this is an example that ReSharper's highlighted. There's a redundant name. What does that mean? Well, you see what I have here. I'm newing up an anonymous type. That is a type that I haven't defined previously. So it's a new object with these 5 properties. And when you have an initializer like this, and the property name is the same as the reference that you're assigning to it, you can just get rid of the reference. So I'm going to go ahead and obey ReSharper, and there's state. And I highlighted this one because I think this is one that you might not be familiar with. The fact that in C# you can do this. And my point here is that we're going to do our refactorings in a way that's suitable for those who know the language fairly well. We're not afraid to use language concepts that might not be super common, as long as we're confident that the members of our team are going to look at this and be able to figure out what this means. I'm not saying use every esoteric language construct you can come up with. I'm saying that this is a normal thing to do in C#, and I want my teammates to be able to do it. And so I'm going to go ahead and say yes to this refactoring. And I think this code is clearer and less cluttered. However, if you like the other way, by all means, keep it that way. The point of this session is not to say which exact refactorings you should do and avoid, only that you think about it and make a decision, and do that in concert with your teammates. Now that I've fixed those 2 issues, I can see that I've got no more warnings. I've got a green check mark. And I'll also highlight that ReSharper also gives you suggestions, and those are marked in green. So I can, again, go to the very first suggestion by clicking on this icon. And I see this refactoring is suggested here. Let's make this an expression. Yes, go ahead.
Your video is covering the top right corner of your screen. Can you just pull Visual Studio over to the left a little bit, just so that I can see what you're
this way
mousing over? Let me see. Yeah, I think that's. Go ahead and talk.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, we got that. I know I can't see that picture.
Move it over another inch.
Okay.
There you go. And then show them the buttons that you were clicking on over there, just because it was hidden by your video the whole time.
I can't remember what buttons you're talking about. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Yes. So I click on this to get to the next warning or the next suggestion. So here's a suggestion to use expression body. So again, this is a C#7 feature that I can just click and use. And likewise, it'll go to the next one, and I can click and use that. So I think this code is better. I think it's more expressive, and it tells me more of what's going on with less clutter. This is a simple getter. It's not that complicated. It's a simple setter. I don't need a full block to be able to express what I'm doing here. And again, if you prefer that you would rather use the block, go right ahead. But I think using these language features like expression bodied properties would be an improvement to most code bases. I'm going to just truck through the rest of these resharper suggestions because they're pretty easy. Here's a
Cool.
private setter that I never use. Now you might be using it through reflection, like through AutoMapper or ORM tool or something. But in this case, I know that I don't have that. So I can go ahead and change it to get only. So this is a frequent refactoring. Like, let's remove things we're not using. Let's restrict. This can be a read-only property, a get-only property. There's no need to make it getter and a setter if you're not using the setter. So I just go ahead with that. At this point, I want to highlight, I'm going to hit build, and I'm going to make sure that I can build. So in fact, I should probably do that after every build. In fact, I only get these await warnings here. I don't have any errors, so it can build successfully. Oh, look at this. It doesn't build successfully. Why is that? Did I make a mistake with my refactoring? So this is an important point. You're going to want to avoid making a mistake and then not realizing it as you move on. Oh, this is a simple refactor. So build often, check your build to make sure it still works. Why didn't this build? Let's try it again. That was allowed. Can I do this? Build that. That gave me an error. And I can tell you why, because this feature was actually introduced in a later version of C#, and I have not upgraded this solution to the latest version of C#. So then I can address that, right? Oh, I'm on .NETwork 5.2. Okay, I see. So is that really what I want? That's kind of old. Do I want to upgrade that? Do I want to use a different C# version? This would be the time where you would make that decision. And that's kind of a refactoring in itself to use a later C# version. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that for now because I'm, well, actually, let's do it. Let's do that upgrade. If I upgrade now to a later version of the .NET framework, I'm not going to actually go through this because I'm afraid it might take a little too long. But this would be the point in a normal workflow where I'd say, let's just bite the bullet, go forward. The changes from 4.5 to 4.7 are small. I'm going to just look at the README and review them, make sure. I'm going to be bold and go ahead in most of my projects, make that upgrade. Now, that's not always possible. Maybe you've got dependencies on the framework that lead you into you can't just upgrade so flippantly. So make a wise decision. I'm not saying be flippant, but I'm just saying be bold and try to do your upgrades as part of your refactoring too. All right, so I can't use expression bodied setters in, I believe this is in C#7. That came in C#8. So I need to upgrade to a later version of C# to be able to do that. So that's okay. And so forth. You would just go through all the rest of these suggestions and do them if you choose or not. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of ReSharper now, since most of you probably don't have ReSharper installed. By the way, if you were trying ReSharper before and you don't really you didn't like it because it was slowing your machine down, I have found that the best way to deal with that is to use it, but then turn it off when you don't want it. You can just click suspend now right here. Or you can just turn off the code analysis part of it, which speeds up most of the behavior a lot. So, all right, so now ReSharper's turned off. So now we're back to kind of stock Visual Studio behavior. Are there any questions that I haven't seen yet?
Nope, we don't have
Okay.
any questions yet.
All right, so the next refactoring I want to show is down in one of Keith's methods called get external logins. Let's go to that one. Here it is. And this method has it's kind of long. I guess it's 40 or so lines here as there's written, but I think there's some improvements to be made here. The first thing I notice is this if-else condition. And look for these in your code. When you have an if-else and you're assigning inside and doing little else, that's a prime candidate for refactoring. So what I would first do is get this. This variable is only needed in the if case, but it's not used anywhere else, right? It's just a constant, so you don't have a naked 256 here. So I can move that outside of the conditional without changing the behavior very easily. And then I've got a very simple this pattern that I know I can refactor. If condition, assign something else, assign something else. And so I can simply refactor that by using the built-in Visual Studio suggestion, convert to conditional expression. I think this is a big improvement to the code. I've taken, the goal of my refactoring here is to make a simple concept appear simple on the screen. The point is, we're not trying to do if something, do a bunch of steps, else do a bunch of unrelated other steps. No, the point of this whole block is to assign a value to state. And so why would we spend 8 lines to do that when you can do it in 1 line? Not because 1 line is better than 8. Sometimes 8 lines is better to express what you're doing. But in this case, I think it's simpler to say, to use the ternary operator, the ternary conditional operator. If generate state is true, it takes this value. Otherwise, it takes this value, which is the null reference. So that gets assigned to state. And I think I've improved this code already because I've taken a concept that was simple and made it appear simple on the screen. And so then I can go even farther. I can say, oh, look at this. I can declare this down here. I'll just move that down there. And now I see that Visual Studio can help me now with moving declaration to be part of the assignment as well. So I've gotten rid of an extra declaration that I didn't mean. Always good to assign, initialize, and declare in the same line if it's easy to read. And I would hold that this is easy to read. If you think it's easier to read the other way, by all means, keep it the other way. But I think what holds us back from doing this kind of refactoring is often just a reluctance that we're going to get it wrong. Not so much that we don't like this better. We like this better. We think it's easier to read, but we're afraid that we're going to screw it up as we do the refactoring. Let's use the tools to our advantage and get it reassigned, get all the assignments and declarations moved around where we want it in the best way. All right, so then what I would like to do here is we've got a for each loop, and very common refactoring is to take a for each loop and get rid of the loop. I like to call it kill the loops. LINQ, especially LINQ, language integrated query, gives us opportunities to kill loops that we're used to making. There's a lot of loops that can go away using functional programming techniques and so forth. That I'm not saying all loops can, but certainly there's less opportunity, there's less need for loops than ever before in C#. So often when I'm doing this kind of refactoring, I will start typing it out above it, and then I keep the old code below it so I can look at it on the same page. And so I want to, instead of doing this loop, notice what's happening here. I'm just newing up an object and I'm adding it to logins, right? So would I be able to do this in a better way? I certainly can. So instead of doing a loop to new up a bunch of objects, let's use LINQ to our advantage. So we're going to take these descriptions, and for each one of them, we're going to select for that description a new external login view model and look. And if I use, in fact, if I use the same iterator, the same iteration reference, I can simply copy all this code and put that right in here. Get rid of the semicolon because it's now an expression inside of the select. And now I've got my collection of external login view model objects. I've created view models out of my descriptions. And so the last step, how do I actually use them? Well, I got to add them to logins. Well, logins is simply a list, and list supports an operation called add range that lets you add a whole collection all at once. So maybe I would just put it in there, but more likely I'm going to do this. I'm going to create a temporary instance here of, and I'm going to call it maybe view models, a temporary reference, I should say, and I will be simply adding it into there. And so there, I feel pretty confident in this refactoring that I didn't make a mistake. As long as I get my semicolons right, I'm good to go. All right, and so there I've made this refactoring. I believe this code is more descriptive and more readable than this for each loop. I don't want the emphasis to be on looping. I want the emphasis to be on taking descriptions and I'm making a new object out of them. And then
Hey,
I'm
Patrick.
adding those to logins. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep, well, you got a quick question here. I want to get it in before you get too far down the road.
Absolutely.
So Eric is asking, Patrick, while you are making changes like this, how often would you commit those changes?
Very often. Great point. So first build often, right? I just got done with that change. So let's build it. It built. So I'm going to go ahead and commit that change. How can there be that no changes? Oh, I got to do the add, right? Good old Git, right? Takes 3 commands to actually commit anything. It's nuts. There we go.
Yep, I'm lazy. I use source tree.
Yeah, I actually developed some batch files of that, but I didn't want to be too black magic-y here. So let's keep going. Yeah, commit often. Like if you know this is good, like I won't do it now for the purposes of, having a fast demo, but I'd run often, like get things running often, make a change in 2 minutes, run it in 30 seconds, make sure it's good, do your little sanity test. Obviously, if you have good testing, unit testing around it, that's going to be even better, right? Run your unit tests very often. There's tools to run your unit tests on every time you hit the save key. And I often use that too. So, but I'm not going to dive into unit testing in this session because obviously I want to focus on refactoring, but great question. Any others?
That is it for now. Great question. Thank you.
All right, great. So I think I've improved this method. I'm going to make one more refactoring here though to make this method even better. This isn't a huge method, but we are doing several things. We are generating state, then we're constructing these view models, which isn't trivial, and then we're adding it to the logins collection. So one thing I might like to do is take this big thing that is conceptually not that big a thing and use the refactoring to say, oh, let's extract a method. And you can do that through this wrench menu, it's actually a screwdriver menu, or you can go into the right click on the code that you've selected and go to the refactoring. Pardon me, that's yeah, it's up here, refactoring. It brings up the same menu. Yep. And so I'm going to just extract a method. And I like to do this for methods that are converting or creating things. And I'm just going to call it, make something. What am I making here? Let's see. I'm making login view models. And I can have high confidence in this refactoring because it's not going to screw up making a private method, right? That's very easy for it to do. And so there, I've now just done a refactoring that I think makes my code better. And then I always take the opportunity to say, okay, well, what are we doing here? It's a return URL, descriptions, and state. Well, do I really need all this? The return URL came in that way. I guess I do need that because that got passed in. Descriptions, do I need that? Well, that got figured out up here, so I guess that's fine to pass in. And then the state, okay, I can live with this because it takes all 3 of these pieces to make a view model. And then I'm returning the collection of view models itself. So there's my view models, and I can add them here and return it.
Okay, we got another question also. When you're ready.
Mhm.
All
Yeah, go
right,
ahead.
Colin asks, you talk about using link to replace loops, but when you begin chaining link to replace multiple operations, have you found that to make it less readable and more difficult to debug?
It can, and that's why sometimes I might do a further refactoring to make that even more readable. See, this is one thing I found. If you refactor something and you find that it makes it a little less readable and it doesn't sit well with you, it's often the fact that you just needed yet another refactoring. And so let's do that here. I have this one to make a collection of view models, but it could also be helpful to make a thing that makes a single view model, and that would make this method. Now, this isn't chaining link statements, but it's the same concept. It's how much do you do to make it more readable? And I'm willing to go a little farther than most in that I'll, again, extract a method here, and maybe I'll call it make view model. And so now I've got a further decompose, and I can decide, no, you know what? This is too much clutter. I've made this worse. Let's actually put this back there's into the caller. In fact, I'll just copy this code right here, right back up into here. And that way I'm never locked into like the refactoring that I attempt. I'm going to refactor and then refactor again, and then I'm going to make it more readable. And in fact, I think I like this better where I'm doing the single one. Okay, this is one that's returning a function. So I'm not sure I like that either. I'll just hit reboot, undo a few times and get back to the way it was. Okay, the point is, you often don't know if the refactoring is better or worse till you get done with it. And then you can either undo it or just keep it. So I'm going to keep it in this state here, but I could see where you might want to do more. Yeah, if this had a link statement, you did select, and then you did order by, and then you did a whole bunch of other link statements, I'd want to organize this code in a way that can be reasonably confident that I'm doing things right. You know, maybe I used line breaks and I put a line break here, and I'm always trying to organize my code to make it more readable. And I'd encourage you to do that when you're working with link or any structure of code.
So we got a couple other questions link related.
Okay.
And so let's see here. Let me
build, make sure I'm good.
So how debuggable is your link version versus the more verbose version?
Well, it's really, I think it's almost the same, because I can put a breakpoint inside my code here, right, inside the Lambda. And so that this, in fact, is running multiple times, once for each item in the description. So I should be able to debug just the same. I think that answers it.
Okay, cool. And then next question here we get, is there a reason we're not just returning the result of make login view models?
Returning the result right here?
Yeah.
I am returning the result. And then it has to be added to the logins.
Okay.
Right. And so the logins is here. It's a new list. Ah, I see what he's saying. This is a list of, yes. So that's a astute further refactoring. We don't need the logins object. We can just, since this is an IEnumeral login view mod, it's the same thing. I can just return view models.toList, or if I prefer to change the method below to return a list, I could do that just the same. Yep, very good.
Yep.
There isn't a reason.
And Joe, and this is Joe again, he asked why added to the list, and maybe that was just a follow-up.
Yep, that's the same idea. And exactly, that's right. That's become second nature. Like, I didn't catch that right away. You're going to catch it because you've done further refactorings. This illustrates another thing. Do your refactorings with your team too. You know, pair up. Do it in a meeting maybe. Get everybody used to see, because it took, I remember the audience showing me that to say, okay, you didn't really pay attention to the fact that this is no longer needed because you've now simplified the way you're getting them.
Mm-hmm.
Very good, right? We all help each other out in finding opportunities to refactor.
Yep.
So I don't know about you. I think this looks a lot better than when I started. This is expressing what we're really doing in this method. And this is just this private thing that goes along with it to fill in the details. So I'm a lot happier with that.
Great. And we have a question here by Forrest. Link is a pretty neat way to refactor into something more readable, but what are your thoughts on possible performance issues?
Performance of a link query should be no worse. It's very seldom that I've seen a performance problem because the link made it worse. Usually, the performance problems that are worse with link are when you're using like link to SQL or link to entities, and the link there is translating into SQL that is suboptimal. But here we're just doing simple collections in memory, so I don't anticipate any issues.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think that's great. Joe, when he was asking about why add to a list, he clarified some more on that as to, does it even need to be in a list? Or
right. Maybe this doesn't need to be a list at all because it's an IEnumerable, right? Okay, great. great point. Let's just change it again. Don't
Right.
change things into lists that don't need to be lists.
Right. All
There.
right. Yep, and I think, some of this refactoring also ties into code reviews as well, right? How you were saying pair programming and other things.
You got it.
Yep. Get people
Perfect.
involved with the code, invested in the code, and you're going to get better refactorings also.
Perfect.
Learn
I
from each
couldn't
other.
say it better.
Yep. Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Let's keep on going, but keep those questions coming. I'm going to jump down to a different method, get error result. Here it is. This is the refactoring I love, and nobody thinks about it. Whenever you've got if and then a big block and then you return after it, that's a great opportunity to invert. So I'm going to look at this, and in fact, Visual Studio suggests it. Let's invert the if. So now I've taken, instead of if not do something, I'm saying if so, let's do the return that we used to do at the bottom. And so now I'm doing this return up here. It reduces that branching. Like, I'll go back to the way it was. We've got a nested ifs here. I will do almost anything to reduce nesting because I think nested ifs are confusing. In fact, any nested blocks are confusing. Let's do as much as we can to make our code linear. So this refactoring, instead of waiting for the bottom to return, I might as well just return up here. Early returns are your friend. Embrace them. So, and then in fact, to make it even more readable, I get rid of these simple, ultra simple cases where there's braces that surround a very simple statement. Let's just get rid of the braces and get rid of the new line. Do that up here too. There we go. And I think this is a simple concept. If it's null, return this. If it's succeeded, return that. How much simpler could you be, right? I think a lot of errors will be reduced if you get rid of the complexity of nesting in trying to express your ideas here. So I've inverted the if. Let's look at one more here.
So I do get a, let's see, right here. Michael says, I think he's referring back to your previous thing. Return function call, question mark, IE, return, make login, view models.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha. Let's look at that again. There's no need to return, create a reference and then return it unless you think it makes it more readable. In this case, I don't think it does. Let's just return the result of making these login view models, right? No need to have an intermediate reference returned there. No big deal. If you think it makes it more readable, or maybe you expect to debug that, and so you want an intermediate step. Now you can inspect this value even without it because you can put a breakpoint on the closing brace and look at the return value, but it can be a pain in the butt. So I wouldn't, oppose the other way, but I do like this way. Keep it simple. All right, I'm going to build, make sure I can build after that last refactor. I'm good there. Let me go down to another method and we'll try another refactoring. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and jump to one that I like a lot. So let's minimize this. I've got another window open here. I'm going to go over to a different solution. So this is my my site, and I'm in a totally different context now, not the same code at all. But here I have a
Hold on, Patrick, we're not seeing your screen. We'll only see.
oh, good old Zoom. I must have clicked the wrong thing. Let's look at this one. All right, so I started up this. I think it's, there we go, share. All right. Hopefully I won't click the wrong button again. Start up a new site. It says, hello. Oh, I've got it still cruft in here from my last presentation. Sorry. Hello, MDC. This is version 1.42. What an even version. Okay, so all this is a very simple, let's look at the code for this. Very simple controller. It gets the greeting from a provider. It's of type I greeting provider. And so here's the concrete version of that. it's this get greeting. It reads from the text what version we're on. Well, what is that? That's this file here, 1.42. That's all it is. And so it reads from the text what our version is. And then based on whatever that is, it's going to give us a different message. Maybe it's going to say odd, or maybe it's going to say even. This is an even version, right? So let's look at this code and figure out if we can see what might be wrong with it. And this is a contrived example of something you're going to run into a lot in your code. What we have here is a tightly coupled reference to file.readAllText. And indeed, you can't inject this. If I wanted to make this method unit testable, there would be no way for me to do that, because I have a static reference directly to this file.readAllText method that always looks at version.txt, and there's no way for me to override that.
Hey, Patrick, we got about 5 more minutes to wrap up, and then we're going to go into a Q&A session for about 5-10 minutes.
Perfect. So what I want to do here is I want to get this into I call it refactoring to proper dependency injection in 7 steps. So the first step is, let's sequester the uninjectable code into a class containing only the tightly coupled code. So this thing here, I want to make this into a method. So I'm going to use the same extract method approach I used before. Now I've got that out. So now I've gotten all that code out of this get greeting class method into its own method. And now, but I want it to be an instant method. So I'm just going to delete the word static, so it becomes an instance method. It's a spurious instance method so far because I haven't actually, it's not using any of the state yet, but let's keep going with it. And then I want to get this into a class containing only the tightly coupled code. So I'm going to use, again, a tool-based refactoring to say, let's go here and this again with resharper. This is easy to do without resharper, but I'm going to do this just in the interest of speed for the demo purposes. Let's create a class with this in it instead of having it be a method. So this is our in our greeting provider. It's going to call this, which is going to be called maybe version provider. So all that is to say that what I've done is I've called the version provider.getVersion, and now here it is in a separate class. So again, I made a small step that was almost trivial. I created a new class. Now I'm calling the new class instead of the old class. And I notice I made a mistake. This needs to be public because it's now in a different class. So building often, again, will save you a lot of pain. Now I can take this and go farther. Step 2 of this refactor is let's make a local reference for the new object only. Well, we've already done that in the sense that we've got this version number. The refactoring took care of that for me. Number 3, I'm going to move that local instance to be that local reference to be an instance reference instead. So let's make a public, or in this case, it should probably be private. The version provider, right? Put that down here. And I'm going to keep the version reference. Like this. This is what I meant to do here, new version provider. So now I've newed up an instance of this, and now down here I can say version equals version provider dot get version. And it's not a string, it is my new class version provider. If I can get my capitalization right. There we go. And then again, build. So at every step along the way, I'm creating valid code that can be run and give me the exact same behavior as before. All right, so that's done now with step 4. I'm step 3, pardon me. I now have an instance of my provider that's going to give me the value I need. Step 4, move that instance field to an abstract type, that is to an interface. So now we've got the version provider here. Let's extract an interface for it. iVersion provider. Okay, so now iVersion provider exists. It's in a different file, but you can imagine it's just one method with get version on it. Now I can depend on, instead of a version provider, I can depend on the abstract type, I version provider. Really, that changes nothing. You can see how this is exactly the same behavior. Still using this concrete version provider here to get my version, which is still tightly coupled to that file. That's done with step 4. Now I can move to step 5. Let's introduce a proper constructor for this object and bastardize those. This language comes from Mark Seaman, if you've ever read him. This is going to be creating a bastard constructor. It's a constructor that's not real dependency injection, but it's a very useful transition. And so I can use the tools here to go ahead and create a constructor. Oops, yeah, no, that's not what I wanted. I'm going to just create I want to be actually in this class, the consuming class. Let's go ahead and create a public greeting provider, and it's going to take in this version provider, right? And in that, I'm going to simply create a new field, initialize it, and I can use these automatic tools to do that very quickly and without any errors. I'm going to always check for null. Now I can get rid of this instance because get rid of this initialization because I've provided in the constructor. So now I've got this, but I also, in order to keep that old code working, I have to give us a default provider too, which is going to be the more straightforward way that we had it before, right? New version provider.
All right, you keep going. If people have questions, start putting them in the send a question button.
Perfect. This is just wrapping up real quick here. So now I've got a bastard constructor, which is this one, and a proper constructor. And so now I can still run this code in the old ways, but the new way will also work with a constructor that now makes it unit testable. I'm no longer depending on this for that constructor. I am depending only on the abstract interface here. So I'm done with step 5. My next step would be to configure that dependency injection so that it can now use this new interface anywhere it needs to in code. And so I would head on up down, and this is ordinary ASP.NET dependency injection. I'm going to add my transient here. If you've done this before, this is simply saying I'm going to take anywhere I need an I version provider, I'm going to use this concrete version provider. And that's in any code that has this startup as its composition root. Now I've got proper dependency injection at the composition root. My code will work. And if nobody else is calling this greeting provider, look, 0 references. Code lens tells me that there isn't. I can get rid of this hard-coded concrete dependency. And now I've successfully refactored to an abstractly defined version provider in my greeting provider. Let's run it, make sure it works. I've now refactored my code in 7 steps to be unit testable, getting rid of the static dependency on the file class and the hard dependency on version.txt. I'm still looking up the same file, but now I can write unit tests and provide my own mock version provider to make sure that this parsing logic is right, which can be very valuable. Get rid of that hard concrete code in your classes so that you can make the business logic testable here. And if you go through each of these steps in order, every one of them is easy and small. So you're not going to make the errors that you do when you try to do this in one big jump. Finally, I'm going to clean up my code. This can be made. This is the final refactor I'll mention. Clean up your code when you're done. Like this can be read only. Why not, right? And then this should probably be in its own class. So let's go ahead and I think we can do this with resharper. Move to version provider.cs. There it is. I've now got my 2 files all proper. I should probably continue to clean up my code by, adding summary comments if that's my team practice, and so on and so on. You can imagine where you go from here. But I think this is a lot better. You've used the 7 steps to get this version provider. And in fact, I want this version provider, not the one that was passed in, because that doesn't exist. This is actually leftover Detrius. I didn't even need to rename that because I've got the private one here.
All right, great.
That's
We
it.
got two questions. Yep, we got 2 questions for you. So, Alan wants to know, do you find using implicit types, i.e. var, help the readability of code when the custom type names are rather long?
Sometimes, and sometimes not, right? So say this was var. Well, get version returns something. I don't know what it returns unless I hover and I'm careful to find it out. I would not do this. I would be explicit with string. However, in this case, I know that even and odd are strings. So it's pretty easy for me from glancing at the code to see that this is a string. So I could go var. I'd probably still do string. I only use var when it's very obvious what the type is, right? So I might go like that because I'm newing it up so we know what the type is. Again, settle on something with your team. It doesn't really matter which way you go, as long as you as a team can agree on it and be consistent.
Great. Our next question here from Steve is, how do you determine if and when a method or class has become too big? Any rules of thumb you follow?
Obviously, it depends on the context of your code. 100 lines is really big for a method in almost any context. I could argue that sometimes 10 lines is too big for a method. But if you've got all kinds of 100 and 1,000 line methods, of course, focusing on the 10 line methods is not very helpful. So I would say if it's in the upper echelon of sizes for your code base, it's too large, right? If you've got a code that's all 10 line methods, maybe some of your methods should be refactored to be 5 lines or less. For some of you, that's ridiculous. You're never going to get your code down to 5 line methods. You'd be lucky if they're under 100 lines. So start at your biggest one and work your way down.
Great question. I think it also depends on the name of the method, right? Or the class, and that you want it to be succinct to its name. It should only do what its name implies.
You got it. All right, so let's go back to this real quick. I'm happy to take more questions.
Any other questions? Please send them now. Otherwise, we're going to be calling it quit here pretty soon. We have a hard stop at 2:55.
Perfect.
Central Time.
Oh, stupid PowerPoint keeps going where I don't want to go. So refactorings I use most often are on this slide. The slides are posted on shalopsky.com. This will give you a chance to go back and look at what each of these are. I think I demoed most of these that are on the screen here, but so a few I didn't demo, but there's obviously more than this. For more, go ahead and go to shalopsky.com, or I did provide this tiny URL /refactor 2020 to get to the particular page. And if you could fill out the survey, there's that survey on the bottom right. I would love to get more feedback on how this session went, what could make it better. And if you want to talk more, just tweet at me or email me or whatever. Hit me up on LinkedIn or whatever, and we can go from there. And I'd be happy to go farther with the discussion. Any more questions?
Nope, I think that is it. And I want to say thank you to Patrick and ILM for MDC 2020 in this session. It was awesome. Thanks for all the attendees for showing up. And as Patrick said, please press the survey button at the bottom right of your screen and fill out that survey. That will help us improve the conference for next year and also help out Patrick in his endeavor for refactoring his presentation.
Yes, very good.
All
Thank you a
right.
lot.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you. Take care, and we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.